Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. It's great to be with you. Got some beautiful teachings tonight. Let's light up the darkness. That was the Moshav band singing their song Shir LaHashem, Sing a Song to the King. Beautiful, from their album Songs of Shabbos Volume 1. Who is with us as we get it going on a Sunday evening with some really beautiful teachings? Yehudit in South Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, John in Maine, Nancy, North Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Marion in Glendale. Tom says Shavua Tov, a good week. James in Indianapolis, PK in Colorado, Kat in North Carolina, Bill in Columbia, Heather in Kansas, John in Sedona. Sharon, Erev Tov from Lebanon, New Jersey. Loved the Slichos last night. We're really getting into the frame of mind of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur now. Last night we had the traditional prayers that we say right after Shabbos ends, at least 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. Since Rosh Hashanah begins on a Monday night, a week from tomorrow, we wouldn't have time to do that next Saturday night, so that was last night. Check out the video on the feed. Really, really beautiful praying and singing led by my rabbi, Rav Yekusiel Kalmanson. Who else is with us? Renee in Indiana, Leona in Illinois, Lucy in Minnesota, Christo in Lubbock, Paul in the Great Northwest, David in Indiana. Janice recognizes my t-shirt, The Dead. Paula in Chicago. Franco says, ciao from Trieste, Italy. Welcome from across the pond. Rick in Boca, Melissa in Great Neck, Shannon says, you look like you're having a particularly joyful day. Amen. You know what? Sometimes you just got to act joyful and then you feel joy. Fake it till you make it. It's not a bad way, since it's always a mitzvah to be happy. What do we have to be happy about? We're alive. No matter how bad things get, we're alive. When you have life, you have so much. Where am I? Zach in Washington, Mary in Houston. Sandy says good evening. Michelle in Indiana, Betty in North Carolina. PK was watching the Slichot. Your rabbi has a beautiful voice. Yeah, he really does. It's very, very special davening with Rav Yekusiel. And Mercedes in California, over there on the YouTube side. Lynn in North Texas. Ayofi in Ocala, Seraphim in California. And Kevin is with us. Let's say a prayer for a moment. God, please watch over and spare all the people that are in harm's way, whether it be in the situation that is in Afghanistan or here on our shores in the United States, the hurricane that is striking Louisiana. May everybody be safe. And we say Amen. We are going to encounter a couple of very beautiful teachings from Hillel, Hillel the Elder, the great sage Hillel. One of them is found on our daf, on our page 53 here in Tractate Sukkah. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud. It has 56 pages, so we're really near the end now. Are we on 53? Yeah, we're on 53. And one of these teachings that we're going to encounter tonight is also found in Pirkei Avos, the chapters of the fathers, the chapters of the elders, as it were. And I just thought I would share a few more of these teachings of Hillel. They are just classic Jewish wisdom teachings. Hillel said, this is Pirkei Avos, chapter 2, verse 4. Hillel said, do not separate yourself from the community. Do not trust in yourself until the day of your death, meaning do not believe that you are immune to transgressing, to committing a sin. No one is above that. It could, temptation could strike any person. You could succumb if you're not careful to fight against it. Hillel also said, do not judge your fellow man until you have reached his place. That is a teaching we've heard many times, slightly different forms. The original is Hillel the Elder. Do not say something that cannot be understood, trusting that in the end it will be understood. Speak clearly. Don't think that just because people should get what you're saying, they will. Make sure that you speak clearly. Say not, when I shall have leisure, then I shall study, because perhaps you will not have leisure. Don't assume that there will be time tomorrow to do this Torah learning you could do today. Hillel used to say, a brute is not sin-fearing, nor is an ignorant person pious, nor can a timid person learn, nor can an impatient person teach, nor will someone who engages too much in business become wise. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. Good way to look at that. That's not a sexist statement. In other words, if you look around and you don't see someone, and you say, this needs to be done, the fact that you said this needs to be done indicates that you know what needs to be done, and there may not be someone else to do it, so step in and do it. Moreover, he saw a skull floating on the face of the water. He said to it, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. Okay, we pick it up at the bottom of the B-side of page 52, here in the 5th chapter of Tractate Sukkah. These are the laws of Sukkot, or Sukkot, the fall festival, which will be here very soon, right? 5 days after Yom Kippur. The Mishna continues, and there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem that was not illuminated from the light of the place of the drawing of the water. One of the sages taught it was so bright that a woman would be able to sort wheat by the light of the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water. Right, so we've seen the water was drawn. This was the water for the water libations that were done on the altar in the Holy Temple when the temple was standing. The water was drawn a little bit south of the Temple Mount from the pool of Siloam. And then the water was brought up amidst great dancing and celebration. Then the water libations were performed on the altar. And as we've seen, they had these great, massive light fixtures. They were burning oil lamps, but they were huge golden bowls, 4 at the top of 4 large golden poles, casting a tremendous amount of light, for the ancient world. And the Temple Mount was lit up and visible from all of Jerusalem during these great celebrations of Sukkot. The Mishnah continues, the pious and the men of action would dance before the people who attended the celebration. And the sages taught in the Tosefta that some of them would say in their song praising God, happy is our youth as we did not sin then, that did not embarrass our old age. And these are the pious and the men of action who spent all their lives engaged in Torah and mitzvahs. And some would say, happy is our old age that atoned for our youth when we sinned. And these are the penitents. Both these and those say, happy is he who did not sin, and he who sinned should repent, and God will absolve him. As we've learned elsewhere, it's better never to have sinned at all. But if you did sin, and then you make a sincere atonement, then somehow those sins get turned into merits, and the penitent can stand where the one who was innocent cannot even tread. For great is teshuvah, great is atonement. It is taught in the Tosefta. They said about Hillel the Elder, whose teachings we were just reading in Pirkei Avos, they said about Hillel the Elder that when he was rejoicing at the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water, he said this, if I am here, everyone is here. And if I am not here, who is here? In other words, one must consider himself as the one upon whom it is incumbent to fulfill obligations, and he must not rely on others to do so. Same teaching as where there is no man, be the man. Where am I? am I to do so? He would also say, to the place that I love, there my feet take me, and therefore I come to the temple. And the Holy One, blessed be He, says, before we move on, to the place that I love, there my feet take me. This is similar to a teaching we've also seen elsewhere. I think it's also in Pirkei Avos, that your feet will help you get to where you want to go. In other words, if you are a God-fearing person that seeks to do good in this world, then you will get assistance, not only from your feet, but even from the heavenly forces, right? The angels will help you. You will be assisted. You'll get heavenly assistance in doing the good that you want to do. Conversely, if you're drawn to sin, your feet will take you to sin, and you will even get assistance from heaven. In other words, that which you're drawn to do, the opportunities to do it will present themselves. That's why it's so important to desire to do good. Even if you can't see a way to do the good that's needed in a situation, the fact that you want it, the fact that you take the first step, the fact that you're trying, opportunities will open up for you to do what needs to be done. But conversely, if you're drawn to evil, opportunities will be open up for you to do evil. And the Holy One, blessed be He, says, if you come to my house, I will come to your house. If you do not come to my house, I will not come to your house. As it is stated, in every place that I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you, right? So when the temple was standing, going to God's house meant making that pilgrimage to go to the holy temple. Since the temple was destroyed, our sages teach elsewhere that the altar, the holy altar where the offerings were brought in the holy temple, it was in a sense the center of the Jewish religion in terms of the ancient world, right? The center, all eyes were focused on the altar in the center of the temple where the offerings were brought on behalf of the Jewish people. Once the temple was destroyed, that altar was replaced by what? By the dinner table in a Jewish home. If you make peace at the table, you make peace in the world. Right? If you come to the table and you make a blessing when you're going to eat, that's like coming to God's house. And then God comes to your house and blesses you. If you just eat like an animal, unthankful of where that food came from and the opportunity to eat it in this world and being grateful for your blessings, if you forget to do that, well, then measure for measure you will receive in the same way. Now, one could say, but all the time we see that innocent people suffer in this world and the wicked people prosper. Yes, that is true. That is a mystery. It is very difficult to understand that. But we have faith that because we don't have souls, we are souls, we have bodies, so you and I are eternal beings, and there is more than enough time and ample opportunity for us to see the reward for our good deeds and the punishment for our bad deeds beyond this life. Yes, it takes faith in believing that you are an eternal being, a soul, and that there will be a measure for measure meted out beyond this life, if not in this life. There are many rewards that we see in this world, right? There are many times that we see the wicked punished in this world, and we see the good rewarded in this world. But it is not measure for measure, for if it was, it would not take faith in God and God's system. It wouldn't take faith, it would be something else. And then we would not be the humans that we are, and God intended us for us to be the humans that we are. Let's go on. The Gemara cites another statement of Hillel the Elder. Additionally, he once saw a skull that was floating on the water, and he said to it, "Because you drowned others, they drowned you. And those that drowned you will be drowned. This is the way of the world. Everyone is punished measure for measure." Now, doesn't that violate this idea that we don't see in this world that everyone is punished measure for measure? But Hillel would say to you two things. One, ultimately there will be an exact accountability for everyone's deeds because your soul will come before the heavenly tribunal for judgment. But even in this world, People who lead a life of violence are unlikely, not impossible, certainly not impossible, but unlikely to escape punishment for their deeds. And indeed, the Art Scroll says that when he saw that skull floating in the water, it wasn't just a bony skull. He recognized by some sign that that was indeed the skull of a murderer, someone who had killed, had gotten away with it, but then didn't get away with it in the end. And we do have faith that God is a just God who runs a just world. It's just not always apparent to us here, and with good reason, because then it wouldn't require faith to believe in God. Okay. Apropos following one's feet, Rabbi Yochanan said, the feet of a person are responsible for him. To the place where he is in demand, there they lead him. This is a teaching really about God's omniscience and omnipotence, right? That God is working through us with the invisible hand, as it were, and we think we're making all our choices, and we are, and we're going to be rewarded and punished for our choices. Nevertheless, God is running the world, and where we're needed, where we're supposed to end up, there we will be. And where we deserve to be, there we will end up. And the Gemara relates with regard to these two Cushites who would stand before Solomon, and their names were Elihoreph and Ahijah, the sons of Shisha. We learn about them in the first book of Kings 4:3. And they were scribes of Solomon. And one day Solomon saw that the angel of death was sad. He said to him, "Why are you sad?" The angel of death said to Solomon, "Well, they are asking me to take the lives of these two Cushites who are sitting there." Solomon, and for some reason, like the angel of death is sad, like he couldn't take their lives. He said he was supposed to take their lives, and for some reason he couldn't. It was unexplained why. So Solomon assumed that the angel of death was sad that he would have to be taking those two men, to die and go to the next world. What did Solomon do? He handed them to the demons over whom Solomon had dominion. Right? This is you're getting this is this is a Talmudic tale, and in it Solomon has conversations with the angel of death and dominion over certain supernatural creatures like these demons. So Solomon handed them to the demons and sent them to the district of Luz, where the angel of death has no dominion. When they arrived at the district of Luz, they died. And the following day, Solomon saw that the angel of death was happy, and he said to him, "Why are you happy?" And he replied, "Well, in the place that they asked me to take them, there you sent them." The angel of death was instructed to take their lives in the district of Luz. Since they resided in Solomon's palace and never went to Luz, he was unable to complete his mission. That is what saddened him. Ultimately, Solomon dispatched them to Luz, enabling the angel to accomplish his mission, and that pleased him. Immediately, Solomon began to speak, and he said, "The feet of a person are responsible for him. To the place where he is in demand, there they lead him." And that's the basis, actually, of many stories that we find in folklore and opera, in other story traditions, right? That somebody, gets a premonition of where they're going to die, and so, they run the other way, or someone who cares about them sends them the other way. And what do? They end up going to the very place where it was forecast that they would die. They just didn't know that. Shakespeare uses that tool quite a bit. It is taught in a Baraisa. They said about Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that when he would rejoice at the celebration of the place of the drawing water, he would take 8 flaming torches and toss one and catch another, juggling them, and though all were in the air at the same time, they would not touch each other. And when he would prostrate himself, he would insert his 2 thumbs in the ground and bow and kiss the floor of the courtyard and straighten. And there was not any other creature that could do that due to the extreme difficulty involved. And this was the form of bowing called kida, performed by the high priest. Only the high priest would do that during the high holidays. Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, I mean, he was the Nasi. He was the highest, the most powerful, most important, most prominent, most respected, awe-inspiring figure in ancient Israel, with the exception of the king and the high priest. Doesn't it seem a little bit beneath his dignity to rejoice like this and be juggling, torches at the time of celebration? But like King David, to celebrate at the time that we're commanded to celebrate is a good thing, and he would put his dignity aside, as it were, to show people, to model the behavior of celebrating with tremendous simcha when it's time to celebrate, like Sukkah. And the Gemara relates, Levi, the sage Levi, demonstrated Akida before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and he strained his thigh and he came up lame. And the Gemara asks, and is that what caused him to be lame? But didn't Rabbi Elazar say one should never speak impertinently toward God above? A great person once spoke impertinently toward God above, and even though his prayers were answered, he was still punished and he came up lame. And who was this great person? It was Levi. Apparently his condition was not caused by his bow. And the Gemara answers, there is no contradiction. Both this and that caused him to come up lame. Because he spoke impertinently toward God, he therefore was injured while exerting himself in demonstrating Akida. Right? So it's not always that when we are impertinent toward God or we make some kind of a transgression that a lightning bolt comes from the sky. Rather, it's something that seems like natural causes will happen at some point. But the sages said if you connect the dots, that was a measure for measure. But it was hidden. Why? Because God's presence is hidden in this world by design. If God's presence was completely apparent, then we would be in the place of the angels who don't really have free will because they have no choice. I mean, when you're completely overwhelmed by the awesomeness of God, of course you're going to do whatever God says. When God is hidden is when you are free to make your own choices, and that's the world we live in. Apropos the rejoicing of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel at the celebration of the place of the drawing of water, the Gemara recounts, Levi would walk before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, juggling with 8 knives. Shmuel would juggle before King Shapur with 8 glasses of wine without spilling. Abaye would juggle before Rabbah with 8 eggs, and some say he did so with 4 eggs. All these were cited. So the rabbis, the sages, they weren't just bookish people who didn't do anything else. They had some skills that they would bring out when it was time to celebrate. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah said, when we would rejoice in the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water, we did not see sleep in our eyes the entire festival, meaning the whole week of Sukkah. How so? In the first hour of the day, the daily morning offering was In the first hour of the day, the daily morning offering was sacrificed, and everybody came to watch. From there, they proceeded to engage in prayer in the synagogue. From there, to watch the sacrifice of the additional offerings. From there, to the synagogue to recite the additional prayer. From there, they would proceed to the study hall to study Torah. From there, to the eating and drinking in the Sukkah. From there, to the afternoon prayer. From there, they would proceed to the daily afternoon offering in the temple. And from this point forward, they proceeded to the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water. And the Gemara wonders, is that so? But didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, one who took an oath that I will not sleep 3 days, one flogs him immediately for taking such an oath in vain? And he may sleep immediately because it is impossible to stay awake for 3 days uninterrupted. Rather, this is what Rabbi Yehoshua is saying. We did not experience the sense of actual sleep because they would merely doze on each other's shoulders. In any case, they were not actually awake for the entire week. This is actually pretty similar to spending a week in Uman for Rosh Hashanah. Uman is where the grave is, the final resting place of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. I've been there a couple times and documented my journey there. You can find that on our website at accidentaltalmudist.org. But that is so festive that, yeah, you sleep a little bit during that week, but really very little. There's so much simcha, so much joy, so much Torah learning, so much celebration, so much bonding to do. And that's what Sukkot was like in Jerusalem when the temple was standing. And the Gemara wonders, and the Mishnah continues. The musicians would stand on the 15 stairs that descend from the Israelites' courtyard to the women's courtyard. We're now going back to the Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 5. We're kind of breaking it down, going line by line. And this is the Gemara's discussing those lines of the Mishnah. So the musicians would stand on the 15 stairs that descend from the Israelites' courtyard to the women's courtyard, corresponding to the 15 Songs of Ascents in Psalms. And Rav Chisda said to one of the sages, who was organizing Agadah before him. Agadah is the sort of homiletic teachings of the Talmud. Did you hear with regard to these 15 Songs of Ascents in Psalms, corresponding to what did David say them? Did you hear about these 15 Songs of Ascents, right? So the 15 steps that go down from the inner courtyard to the outer courtyard in the temple compound correspond to this sequence of Psalms called the Songs of Ascents. Which ones are they? I think it's maybe like Psalm 136 to Psalm 150 or 120 to 135. I can't remember exactly. But it's around there, the later Psalms. And so did you hear with regard to these 15 Songs of Ascents that are in the Psalms, corresponding to what did David say them? He said to him that this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. At the time that David dug the drain pipes in the foundation of the temple. In other words, why were there 15 steps? Because there were 15 Songs of Ascents in the Psalms that were written by David. But why did David write 15 Songs of Ascent? To what did that correspond? And that's what we're hearing now. So at the time that David dug the drain pipes in the foundation of the temple. So recall that David selected the place on the mount where the temple would be built. Solomon, his son, built the temple, but David selected the place. And now we're learning, well, he actually, started preparing the way. He was involved in digging the foundations of the temple, even though he didn't merit to build the temple himself. And so at the time that David dug the drain pipes in the foundations of the temple, and we've talked about that those drain pipes under the altar, right, have existed since the time of creation, right? During the 6 days of creation is when those drain pipes were dug. So what does this mean? Did David make them or did God make them? And so it seems like David sort of opened them. And then there he saw that there were these openings that went way down into the deep. Right? And so Rabbi Yochanan said, at the time that David dug the drain pipes in the foundation of the temple, the waters of the depths rose and sought to inundate the world. Right? So back when there was the flood of Noah, we learn that the world was flooded because water came from two directions, from above in those 40 days of rain, but also from below, the waters from beneath the world, right? The waters that were separated when God created the world, the upper waters and the lower waters. And the world, the earth, is a firmament in between them. And so it's these lower waters, right? And so when David went to open up these drain pipes that would be open and be receiving wastewater essentially from the temple and from the offerings on the altar, when he exposed that, the lower waters started to rise and they sought to inundate the world, create another flood like the time of Noah. And immediately David recited the 15 Psalms of the Songs of Ascents and caused the waters to subside. And Rav Chisda said, if so, should they be called the 15 Songs of Ascents? They should have been called the Songs of Descents. And Rav Chisda continued and said to him, since you reminded me of this matter, this is what was originally stated. At the time that David dug the drain pipes, the waters of the depths rose and sought to inundate the world. David said, is there anyone knows whether it is permitted to write the sacred name of God on an earthenware shard? In other words, can you write the name of God on something that is temporary and will break and is disposable? Is that an affront to the honor of God? Is it permitted? If it is permitted, we will write it on this earthenware shard and throw it into the depths, and those waters will subside. How he knew that, not explained. But there was no one who said anything to him. They didn't know whether it was permitted to write God's name in a place that they knew would be erased. And David said, anyone who knows what to say and does not say anything, may he be strangled in his throat. Because right now we're all going to die unless someone comes up with the information that we need. And then Achitophel raised a Kal V'chomer argument and a fortiori argument on his own. And he said, well, just as in order to make peace between a man and his wife, in the case of the sota, the suspected adulteress, when the husband suspects his wife of having committed adultery, the Torah said, my name, meaning God's name, that was written in sanctity will be erased on the water to establish peace for the whole world in its entirety. All the more so is it permitted. In other words, okay, so in the procedure of the sota, the suspected adulteress, part of that procedure when the husband brings his wife that he suspected of cheating on him to the temple, and there's this whole procedure, and part of that procedure is that God's name is written on a piece of paper and put in these waters, these bitter waters, and then she's going to be made to drink them, right? So God's name is dissolved in that water. If she's innocent, she drinks the water, nothing happens to her. And in fact, if they hadn't had a baby and that was perhaps part of their strife, she will now be fertile and will be able to conceive a baby. If she did commit adultery when she drinks those waters, she dies, right? The assumption, right? The default position, she drinks and lives, means she's innocent. As opposed to in Salem, right? They would sink the witches, and if she sinks, she's innocent, but she's dead, right? It's crazy. Okay, so the point is, if for the sake of making peace between a husband and wife, God's name could be erased, well then all the more so to save all the human beings from another flood, surely God's name can be erased on this earthenware shard that you want to toss into the depths. And so he said to David, it is permitted. So he, meaning David, wrote the sacred name on the earthenware shard and cast it into the depths, and the waters in the depths subsided 16,000 cubits. And when he saw that they subsided excessively, he said, the higher the waters in the aquifers, the moister and more fertile the soil of the world. We don't want it to be too deep. The waters of the deep can't be so deep beneath the surface. And so he recited the 15 songs of the ascents, right? These songs of ascents that we're talking about, corresponding to the 15 stairs from the inner courtyard to the outer courtyard in the temple. He recited the 15 songs of ascents, and the waters elevated from 15,000, and the waters came up 15,000 cubits. They had gone down 16,000 cubits. They came up 15. So now those sort of lower waters beneath the world came up to a depth of 1,000 cubits beneath the surface. And the Gemara asks, but wait a minute. What do you mean 1,000 cubits? Don't we see that when we dig a little, significantly less than 1,000 cubits, water emerges very often, right? You dig a well, you don't have to go down 1,000 cubits, which would be like, 1,500 feet. You find water much higher elevate, much shallower depths than that under the surface of the earth. And then we find water. And so Rav Misharshia said that is from the ascent of the Euphrates River, which flows at a higher altitude than do other rivers. The water flows up through underground passages to reach the river, and that is why water emerges when one digs in the hills of Babylonia. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 and its Gemaras. Now I'm going to read Mishnah number 3, and then I'm coming to your comments and questions. So if you have any, please get them in now. Mishnah number 3, here in chapter 5 of Tractate Sukkah. One sounds no fewer than 21 blasts, like shofar blasts, in the temple, and one sounds no more than 48. And the Mishnah elaborates, each day there were 21 blasts in the temple. Now here it's translated as trumpet blasts, and in other places they argue a little bit about this. Were these the silver trumpets from the desert, that they had silver trumpets for sort of signaling to the encampment of the children of Israel when we were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years? Or are these shofars that are being used for this purpose? So for now, we'll just go with the translation here, which is the trumpet blasts. Okay, so one sounds no fewer than 21 trumpet blasts in the temple, and one sounds no more than 48. And the Mishnah elaborates, each day there were 21 trumpet blasts in the temple. 3 blasts were sounded for the opening of the gates in the morning, 9 for the daily morning offering, and 9 for the daily afternoon offering. There were offerings every day, communal offerings in the morning and in the afternoon, totaling 21. 3 blasts in the morning, 9 for the morning offerings, and 9 for the afternoon offerings. And on a day when the additional offerings were sacrificed, for example, Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of a month, with the additional offerings, they would add 9 additional blasts. And on Erev Shabbos, right, on Friday afternoon, they would add 6 more blasts adjacent to the onset of Shabbos. 3 to stop the people from their labor, as the blasts inform the people that Shabbat is approaching and they should stop working. And 3 at the onset of Shabbos to demarcate between sacred and profane. We studied this earlier in Tractate Shabbos, that there would be first these 3 blasts spaced well apart, and they were sort of telling the people in the fields to return to the towns to the city, the people who are working in the market to close their stalls, and one more that it's, you have just a little bit of time left, and then there would be 3 blasts and it's Shabbos, right? 3 to stop people from their labor, as the blasts inform the people that Shabbos is approaching and they stop working, and 3 at the onset of Shabbos to demarcate between sacred and profane. And finally, the last paragraph we'll cover today, on Shabbos Eve, Erev Shabbos, right, Friday afternoon, during the festival of Sukkot, there were 48 blasts. How so? 3 in the morning for the opening of the gates, 3 for the upper gate and 3 for the lower gate, and 3 for the filling of the vessels with water, for the water libations, as described in the sequence of the ritual of drawing the water for the water libation, which we covered on page 48. And 3 when pouring the water libation upon the altar, 9 for the daily morning offering, and 9 for the daily afternoon offering, 9 for the additional offerings of the holiday, 3 to stop the people from work because it's Friday afternoon, and 3 more to tell them Shabbos has begun. So a maximum of 48 blasts could be heard at the temple on any given day. Okay, let me go to your comments and questions. Right. Sharon Frant Brooks. I always looked at that verse about where there is no man in the Yiddish. Be a mensch where there is no mensch, where no mensch is seen. Not just being the person in the room, but a person of decency. Couldn't agree with you more, Sharon. That's exactly right. She also says, it is also how I see the verse in Exodus when Moses looks around and sees no man. She's referring to when Moses saw the burning bush, right? And he looked around and says he saw no man. That meaning no one else had turned to see this sight, but Moses did. I'm sorry. I think you're talking about when he saw the Egyptian striking the Jewish slave, and he saw no man saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is unjust. Somebody should step in, but there was no man, so he did it. No one else was decent enough to step up and save the Jewish slave, so he did it. But the reason I mentioned that, I read elsewhere that those are connected, right? Is because Moses saw no man stepping in to do justice when that overseer was whipping that poor Jewish slave, perhaps almost to death, and he stepped in. And later, it's part of that same character, and he merited to see the miracle of the burning bush. But he turned aside and looked. Maybe other people had passed by and said, well, whatever, it just looks like a bush burning, so what, right? Bill Eldridge. Now, inquiry about if you come to my house, I will go to your house. What does that mean for, say, pious monotheists among the Gentiles? When the temple was standing, was there an expectation that we would make a trip to the temple once in our life? Or was it enough we worshipped him in our own lands and Israel made sacrifices on our behalf? It's a great question, Bill. Was there an expectation that people would make at least one pilgrimage to the temple in ancient times? I don't think that it was a mitzvah, right? It wasn't a commandment to non-Jews that they go up to the Temple Mount. However, we do have the tradition that sacrifices were accepted on behalf of non-Jews. There were certain sacrifices that could be brought. And moreover, during Sukkot, which is what we're studying now, the 70 bowls of Sukkot were offered on behalf of the whole world. So offerings were brought on behalf of all the nations, right? The 70 nations. What you're asking is, was there an expectation? I don't think there was an expectation. It certainly wasn't a commandment, but all were welcome. So those whose hearts would draw them could go, and I think that was the beauty of it. And it's still that case, that not everyone can ascend onto the Temple Mount. That's a different story. But at the Western Wall, which is all that's left of that structure of the Second Temple, that outer wall that Herod built. And where Jews consider that the holiest place on earth, but it is in no way limited to Jews, right? Non-Jews go there all the time, and I believe, maybe you've been there, Bill, but I'm sure anyone will say, anyone who's been there felt something special, whether you're Jewish or not. I certainly did. And Bill says, on an only tangentially related note, I love that image of the power and holiness of the altar transmuting into the dinner table. Me too. Sharon, I'm a little confused by the Songs of Ascent. There are some that are about the Babylonian exile, for example, the River of Babylon. So how could they be written by King David? I don't have a good answer for that. Those are called the Songs of Ascent. Definitely not all of the Psalms were written by King David, but maybe there was a tradition. I mean, the Babylonian exile, that was much later than David. I'm not sure how that's explained. I would have to do more research. And if you do the research, Sharon, please let us know. And Seraphim says, wait, that sounds like Jerusalem was located in paradise if the drain pipes were beneath the temple. Did I hear that right? I'm not sure how you connect that to paradise, because this idea of, Gan Eden, right, where Adam and Eve were kicked out of, and then God positioned these guardian angels, literally, guard angels with the ever-turning swords to keep people out of just directly accessing paradise. I don't think that that's associated with the Temple Mount. It is the place, tradition says, where Abraham brought Isaac for the binding of Isaac, and I believe where Jacob had his dream. So it's this nexus, right? It's sort of the closest point between our world, the physical world, and the spiritual world, the upper realm, right? Not upper physically in space, but it's a point of contact between the spiritual realm and the earthly realm. So I'm not sure how that connects to the drain pipes beneath the temple. I'm not sure. Okay. And Tom says, any specified blasts for Musaf? Well, did we mention the additional offerings, the daily morning, the 9 for the daily afternoon offering? Yes, and 9 for the additional offerings, right? So when you're talking about the additional offerings, those are the additional offerings of a festival or the additional offerings of Shabbos. So it seems like there were extra blasts, 9 additional blasts of the trumpets in the Holy Temple for the Musaf offerings. Musaf, which now is the Musaf prayer, the additional prayer that we say on Saturday and holidays, did have additional blasts at the time that the temple was standing. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 54. Have a great night.